Ok, quindi cominciamo oggi con questo interessante seminario di Andrzej Michalczyk dell'Università di Bochum, è un professore associato di storia contemporanea dell'Europa centro-orientale. Ringrazio per questo evento, insomma, il patrocinio sia della Domus Mazziniana che del Comitato per il Risorgimento e l'età delle rivoluzioni di Pisa, ma anche il consolato polacco di Firenze. Prima di far incominciare Andrzej, direi che posso dare la parola ai rappresentanti del consolato polacco qui a Firenze.
Allora, vorrei leggere la lettera del console Stefano Barlacchi. Martedì 12 marzo 2024, Domus Mazziniana. Caro Pietro, come anticipato, per le vie brevi impegni inderogabili di lavoro mi impediscono purtroppo di essere presente a questo importante incontro presso la prestigiosa Domus Mazziniana. Sono molto onorato di sapere che un luogo così importante per la storia d'Italia e di Polonia ospiti oggi un'eccellenza del mondo culturale polacco. Andrzej Michalczyk è testimone autorevole del pensiero e della cultura polacca, le cui profondità hanno dato lustro non soltanto allo sviluppo sociale e culturale della Polonia, ma hanno contribuito in modo significativo e nei secoli alla costruzione delle fondamenta liberali e democratiche dell'Europa di oggi. Porgo dunque il mio più sincero ringraziamento a codesta istituzione culturale per la richiesta di patrocinio a questa iniziativa e per consentire autorevole diffusione alla conoscenza del mondo culturale della Polonia con incontro in programma oggi. Porgo i miei cordiali saluti al dottor Andrzej Michalczyk, ringraziandolo per aver scelto la Toscana quale luogo di diffusione della sua conoscenza e spero di poterlo accogliere in visita a Firenze. Certo di future collaborazioni, auguro successo e partecipazione. Con le più vive cordialità, Stefano Barlacchi, console onorario della Repubblica di Polonia in Firenze e Toscana. Serdecznie zapraszam również pana do Florencji.
Grazie mille. Andrzej farà il suo speech in inglese, però con delle slide in italiano per chi è anche online, per chi segue online, saranno anche trasmissioni online. Nulla, l'unica cosa da aggiungere è che Andrzej lavora soprattutto sulle migrazioni dall'Est Europa, quindi tra il XIX e il XX secolo, ma anche ai giorni nostri. Ad aprile del 2024 pubblicherà la sua monografia sulla le migrazioni dall'Alta Silesia tra 800 ai giorni nostri. Io adesso lascio la parola ad Andrea e leave you the words to the speech, so you can start if you want.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you. You're here. Great to see you here, and I hope you will enjoy my talk. Okay, the talk of my presentation is about how national identities emerged mainly in the 19th century, but with an argument emphasizing the time after World War II, so the 1950s, 1960s, as a crucial period of nation building in East Central Europe. But the starting point is around 1800. When we look at Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, or we look at East Central Europe around 1800, it was a huge state, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Usually we talk about Poland, but mainly from the Polish perspective, there is not the Lithuanian part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's always about Poland. So when we talk about partitions or divisions of Poland, not of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but partitions of Poland. So the Polish national narrative of Polish political narrative dominates in East Central Europe. And around 1800, or before 1800, around 1800, we are in a society based on estates, where social status mattered the most, where despite Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a very diverse state, a very diverse society with different languages, different religions, but the most important thing was still where you were born, in which social group you were born into. So the nobility was the main, the most important part of the society. And when we look at nation building processes in the long 19th century and 20th century, it is much easier when you have a nation state. When you have in your potential nation, your national society, have a nation state, have tools like national schooling, like national military service, like national authorities. There is national public space. Communication a whole public communication goes in standard national language, so it is much easier. It's like France, for example, a big example of a place or a country where nation building processes started a little bit earlier because of those tools. But the main question or the main issue for the potential Polish nation building was how to build a state or how to build a nation or develop a nation without a state. And after the partitions, it was still the noble culture, the noble nation who dominated to create the narrative of the nation and the cultural identity of Poles. I put three different paintings from the 19th century on those visuals, on this visual. All of them deal with noblemen. It's about, one of them is about the warrior husband, so archetypes of being Polish, of being part of the Polish nation. So a warrior husband, a kind of archetype of Poles and Poland is a warrior husband, loving freedom. So all freedom fighters, loving freedom, risking their even death for the nation, the men. And the women sacrificing themselves for the nation, sacrificing themselves for their warrior husbands. This is very long-standing archetype in Poland, starting after 1800, but being very common even nowadays. So when you look at those guys, you probably know who they are. Danuta and Lech Wałęsa, they were not noble. They were born in peasant families in the 1940s. They small, poor peasant farming families, and then they moved from the small villages to the city of Danziga, Gdańsk, started to work as unskilled workers. And Lech became a leader of the national protest, anti-communist protest, and he was a typical freedom fighter. He is still a freedom fighter. This is his core identity. And his wife, he's a Madre Polacca. She's a Madre Polacca. She's a mother Pole. They stay at home, raise their 8 children, and the picture here is very typical. So those archetypes were internalized by the ordinary people too. So not only the noble people advanced or emerged those archetypes in the beginning of the 19th century, but it spread out to the all social groups. We will talk about when, but definitely by 1980s, it is very common in Poland to think in this kind of national archetypes and national culture. So one aspect is about socially based or social base of the national, and another one is aspect is more geographical. You probably know Adam Mickiewicz, so the most famous and important writer, poet from Poland. But okay, I'm already biased, because he is perceived by the Belarusians as the most important Belarusian writer and poet, and he is also the Lithuanians' most important and famous poet. So he has 3 different monuments in Krakow, in Warsaw, of course, too, in Vilnius, and in Minsk, in Belarus. And his name, actually, I'm biased, as you can see. I put in the first line the Polish version of sorry. So in the first line, this Adam Mickiewicz, this is the Polish version. So it's not. This is correct for the Polish national history. But if I would be now if I'm here not here but in Vilnius, the public the audience will protest. It doesn't work. And when you look at the first line of his most famous poem, it starts with Lithuania, my country. And we all have to learn it by heart in Poland. And when I was at school, so we learned, so this is the most important Polish poem, and starts with Lithuania, my country. Why? Why not Poland, my country? But nobody explained us why. This is national narrative. So this guy is the most important Polish writer. So we don't think about, or we don't think negatively about him. But he was born in the Belarusian part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Then he studied in the Lithuanian part, in Vilnius. He studied in Russian and in Polish. And he was a part of Polish nobility. And this is why he was claimed, he's claimed by the Polish national narrative as a part of Poland, of the Polish people. So we move now. And when we look at the Polish nation, or what we think it is, or it was a nation, or what nation mean in Poland in the 19th century, we need to look at different social groups. And actually, Poles, Polaki, that this is only these people, this is only the nobility and intelligentsia. So not more than maybe 5 or 6% of the population. Those guys are Poles, and not anybody else. The townsmen, 8 to 10% of the population. So people from the cities, bourgeoisie, it's unimportant. it was unimportant in the long 19th century. So the cities was not much not populated. They were politically powerless. The whole power was owned by nobility, and they were at the top of the social world. They were landowners, citizens with political rights, and everybody else didn't matter at all in political, from political perspective. And the townsmen, the bourgeoisie, or the very little impact of city people in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is very important, because when you look at Germany, for example, Netherlands, or the British case, or even the French case, it is very much about bourgeoisie. It's very much about city people. They developed new society, or they were at the beginning of those processes of nation building and developing for democracy and so on. So Poland and basically East Central Europe missed this kind of development. Another, let's say, nation in Poland in the 19th century are the Jews, the Jewish people. Also around 8 to 10% of the population, a huge amount of people. They are not really involved in everyday. They are not involved in politics. They are outside of politics. They are more or less an autonomous group in terms of law. And the main group, the major group, are the peasants. 75 to 80% of the people in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were peasants and serfs, comparable to slaves in North and South America. There is research about it. I don't want to talk about now about the differences and similarities, but all the serfs were subject to the will of the landowners. They were definitely not free. There was no freedom for them. They were not allowed to move from one place to another. No, they were not free. They were subordinate to their lords in all matters. They had a small piece of land, but they were not. They didn't own this piece, the small piece of land. They could work in their fields. But first, they were obliged to work in their lord's fields, and they were not paid. So it was an unpaid labor. And one specific aspect of this system is it was very decentralized. So mainly, more or less, every landlord could impose the amount of labor in their estate randomly. So in one estate, it could be like 5 days a week working in the Lord's fields. In another one, could be 6 days, and some of them wanted the peasants to work only for 3 days or 4 days, and there are more than only. It is more than only working in the fields. It's also about services like transportation, services, and so on, so on. So it usually peasants were exploited to the end. They didn't really have time to work on their small pieces of land. And a very common term was to call them, or the nobility called them, instrumentum vocale. So they were like tools, like cattle, but they were able to speak. So instrumentum vocale ne? Und a tool which speaks sometimes. And when we look at popular books on history of Poland before 1800, and I like to present two of them, only the covers, but the main idea is they don't look at the peasants. It's out of 750 pages, only 6 about peasants, serfs. Out of 1,000 pages, only 4 about peasants and serfs. So the history of the huge majority of the Polish-Lithuanian population before 1800 is completely undeveloped. It's not seen, and what these books are about, they are about freedom fighters, about warrior husbands, about Madre Polacki, about Mother Poles. So about guys, about men and women doing uprisings, insurrections, fighting for freedom. The noble history of Poland is in the foreground, definitely. It's even till today. And even worse, the peasants, the serfs, are suspicious. They are, because they were liberated, and the abolition of serfdom came not from the Polish nobility, but it came from the occupiers. So in this national narrative, there's a Polish nation, a noble Polish nation, which lost their freedom, and then now we have occupiers like Russian and Austrian and Russian occupiers, and they liberated the peasants and serfs. So, and the serfs and peasants are grateful to the occupiers. So when you look at the cross at the left, it is a cross erected by a small community, peasant community, to commemorate the freedom given us by Emperor Ferdinand of Habsburg in 1848. So this kind of history is completely, from the perspective of the nobility, is suspicious, is not compatible with national history. And also the Jewish history or the history of the Jewish population in Poland is also not part of the national history. But they made up around 10% of the population. My home city of Warsaw was populated by the end of the 19th century by almost 30%, or by 200,000 people, so more or less 30% of all inhabitants were Jewish people. And before World War II, so at the end of the 1930s, from out of 800,000 inhabitants in Warsaw, 350, 400,000 were Jewish in Warsaw. So nowadays, there's almost nobody with Jewish origin in Warsaw, maybe a couple of thousands of people, so a very, very, very small portion of the population. But it used to be almost a half, so a huge difference before the war. And in some towns, Jews were dominating. They were like 80, 90% of the population, mainly in the eastern and in the southeastern part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, so in the today nowadays part Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, or southeastern Poland. And in terms of anti-Semitism. This is very important. The Jewish people were supervisors, or they act in the name of the Lord. They supervise the peasants. They supervise the serfs. They run the guest, how do you call it, the guest house in the village. So they were paid by the peasants for food, for drinking, for some services. And when the peasants were not able to pay, they had to deal with the Jewish owner of the guest house, or the how do you call it? The restaurant? No.
The tavern.
The tavern. This is the word. The tavern. So the main important, socially more important place, common place in the village. So the peasants were actually not very much in, or they didn't interact with the noble people, they interact with the Jews. So when they hated somebody, and they hated a lot, because it was completely unfair, the system was completely unfair, they hated the Jews the most, and not the nobility. And a lot of the story changed quite a bit around 1900 with the second industrial revolution, because we have a lot of people going from villages to the cities. A lot of cities developed, or like, let's say, I put the example of Lodz, Łódź at the bottom. As you can see, the population was, at the beginning of the 19th century, it was a small village, then populated by around 4,000 people. Then at the beginning of the, not the very beginning, but at the first phase of the second industrial revolution, 50,000 people around 1880, and then 350,000 people at the end of the century. So a lot of villagers, a lot of peasants, after the liberation, after they were allowed, they became freedom and were allowed to move, a lot of them moved to the cities and to the industrial areas. And they started to be involved in mass society, which is completely different to the face-to-face societies in the villages. So they became part of mass production, mass consumption, mass culture, mass politics, and their life context were not longer small or on a small scale, but became more large scale. And mass nationalization began along with urbanization, de-agrarianization, mass politics, mass culture. But it was a first step towards mass nationalization. Because when we look at the population of Poland in the 1930s, it is still very diverse. We have Polish people. What does it mean, Polish in the 1930s? It's being Catholic and speaking Polish. So Catholics speaking Polish dominate. Okay, dominate. It's around 2/3 of the population. But we have a huge and a big group of Ukrainians, Greek Catholics, who spoke Ukrainian language. We have, and they made up more than 10% of the population. We have people, Orthodox people. They made up more than 10% of the population. Jewish people, another 10% of the population. So 1/3 of the population is not Polish speaking and not Catholic. But you can see processes of Polonization, of becoming Polish, are on the way. Because, for example, the Jewish people, as you can see, there are more Polish, or they are actually they 3.2 million Mosaic religious Jews live in Poland, but only 2.8 million of them registered, or they put in the registration category they are Jewish. So around 400,000 said or told the guy who was doing the census, we are Polish, or another, probably the Polish, because Polish culture dominated. But when you look at the last category, the locals, this is something which is, from my perspective, the most important category. Around 1 million people, when they were asked, who are you? Are you Polish? Are you Ukrainian, or are you Ruthenian, or Russian, or German? They answered, I'm from here. I don't understand what you are asking me. I'm from here. This is because when you think about national identities, this is very abstract. This is an abstract concept. You need to think about people who you don't know everybody in your nation, but still you have. So we get to know each other for like half an hour ago, and we can talk about many things because we were raised in Poland, we grew up in Poland, and we have similar schooling and so on and so on. But actually, the natural way of being a part of the group is face to face. And when you don't know a guy, or you don't trust him, because this is outside of your face-to-face community are only foreigners. So when outside of your local community everybody is foreign and a stranger. And I assume, okay, this is defensively said. I'm sure. I'm sure much more than 1 million people felt being local in Poland in the interwar period. For example, I've been doing much research on Upper Silesia, Alto Silesia, and this is the most industrialized place in Poland between the wars. It is an industrial place, an industrial area, and even there, with quite dense schooling, with people living in urban spaces, most of the local people didn't or were not attached to Polishness. They didn't understand the concept. But they are not seen in these statistics because they were automatic. When they spoke Polish, they were automatically attached to Polish, to being Polish. And they were Catholics, they spoke Polish, so they are we can find them in the first line, in the Polish Catholic line. But most of them didn't feel Polishness, didn't feel Polish. When we look at the Second World War, World War II, we have two very important developments in this story. Why? The Soviets and the Nazis systematically killed Polish intelligentsia. You surely know the Katyn massacre, or the massacres done by the Soviets in April 1940. Around 20,000 intelligentsia people were killed. Many Polish academic professors were deported to concentration camps by the Nazis. Many of them didn't survive the war. And last but not least, when the Warsaw Uprising started. The Warsaw Uprising is very much part of the narrative of uprisings in Poland. It was run by the Polish freedom fighters, the Polish intelligentsia. Even the lower classes in Warsaw, the poor people in Warsaw, didn't support the uprising too much. It was supported mainly by the intelligentsia, and a good portion, a big section of the Polish Warsaw intelligentsia was killed during the uprising. And if they were not killed, they left Poland after the war, or were exposed, or were deported. So when the Soviets came and annexed, or not annexed, but overtook the power in Poland, it was easier for them. Because the intelligentsia, the noble people, the educated people, the people who were active in the public life, they were not there, or they were decimated. So it was much easier. And it was much easier to form a new nation because all the minorities or the not Polish people or not Catholics were either exposed or killed during the war. Like 3 million Jews were murdered. The Ukrainians from the Polish part were deported to the Soviet part, or stayed in the former Eastern Poland and now the Soviet Union. The Germans were expelled. All the Germans, or almost all the Germans, were expelled after the war, and the Orthodox population became Soviet citizens in the former Eastern Poland, now the Soviet part of the Soviet Union. So the Polish society after 1945 is mostly homogenized in terms of more than 95% of the population is Polish-speaking, Catholic, and mainly of peasant origin. And this is paradox, because when you look at those historical books or the historical research about Polish nation and Polish history, it's very much about noble people and intelligentsia, but the social origin of the Polish nation, of the Polish society nowadays, it's definitely peasant. It's definitely serf. So this is a society of former serfs and peasants. And this is the last slide, but we need a little bit more time for it. When Poland became communist, after 1945, the communist regimes started an attempt to create an identity of a new Polish man. And it was based on peasantry, it was based on workers, but it was a violent attempt. People were not free to move freely. People were not free to consume or being part of a consumer society. This attempt failed very quickly at the latest in the 1960s. But some systemic changes occurred between 1945 and 1970. For example, in the agriculture, so before 1939, after Poland gained the independence, 1918, and the Polish elites after 1918 didn't distributed the land among the peasantry. The peasantry was a little bit outside of the mainstream politics or the mainstream society. But then, under communism, the communists redistributed land of the noble people, of the intelligentsia, because the noble people and intelligentsia were killed or expelled or deported. So it was quite easy to redistribute the agricultural land, and the peasant, a lot of peasants were grateful for the new regime, because it was the first time peasants did get something from the state, and they were seen as a core of the Polish society and the Polish nation. Another systemic change was urbanization. Before 1939, or between 1918 and 1939, it was only a little urbanization, and then it started in a huge way, on grand scale. New cities, huge cities, people, it was, I can say, it was like exodus from villages to the city areas. And this is the story of my parents, for example. They were born in 1950 in small, poor villages, like 100 kilometers from Warsaw. And they were sent by my grandparents to the city, to Warsaw, to attend a secondary school, which was completely it was not imaginable before the war. And now, my grandmother saw an article in the newspaper calling for a call for a new school in Warsaw, like North School or Garden School. She had 5 children. So my father had 4 siblings and my mother had 4 siblings too. The oldest guy stayed in the village in both cases, and the oldest, my uncle, stayed in the estate in the land, and all of them, or all the others, were sent to either small cities in not far away from the villages, or to Warsaw, or to other places in Poland. And it's a lot of migration, a lot of mobility in the 1950s, 1960s. It's a period when millions of people are on the way. And I suppose it is not only in Poland, it is not only a Polish story. For example, as you told already, I did research on migration from Polish-German borderlands, and one group of the people from there went to the United States, to Texas, and I interviewed them, or descendants of the migrants. And these stories are very similar. It is in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, or not before 1940s, 50s, 60s, when those small local communities opened up, and a lot of people went from the villages, from rural areas to the cities. And then I went to Brazil to interview another part of this migration, of the migration processes, and it's the same story. They started they lived together in face-to-face communities until 1940s. And it is not before 1950s and 60s when a lot of people started to go to urban areas and to learn standard language. In the case of the migrants, it is also about standard language, about the language of the country. And they started in the Polish case, but I observed it as well in the United States and in Brazil too. The main society is expanding a lot. it's involving more and more people. And this is something I was very surprised first, because these are completely different systems, communist system and capitalistic system, and Brazil is like somewhere in between, but very similar processes. And so I think it's what is stated here about communism in Poland. It's not very much about communism, but it's something globally expanding. It's maybe not in the same time, but more or less somewhere between 1940s, 1950s, and 60s. And there is more there are more educational opportunities for poor people, more social mobility opportunities for people. As I said, my grandparents were born and lived and died in a very small, poor village. Then my parents moved to Warsaw, to a huge city, and did secondary school. And I went to university, like 50 or 60 years later. So it's a very common story. And one question is why the Nobel national narrative came back, because it is actually about the peasants. It is actually about the workers who advanced socially in the 1950s, 60s. But you remember Lech Wałęsa and Danuta Wałęsa. He's a freedom fighter, she's Mother Paul. So they internalized those noble archetypes. And you probably know the same generation, the Ziggy Bonik, the Bello di Notte in Italy. He was the best guy for important games. He was outperforming in the really important games. He is a freedom fighter, he's a revolutionist. But in the everyday life and everyday training and practice, bello di notte. Not too much input, not too much performance. It is in a very unusual situation, in special situations, a lot of outperforming, but much more difficult in everyday life. And why? Because of those archetypes emerging in the 19th century. And then when the communist regime noticed people are not happy with us, we are not able to provide good working conditions. We are not able to provide well-paid jobs. We are not able to provide a consumer society or consumption opportunities, goods and services. So what did they do? They did almost the same what Putin did or is doing or has been doing in Russia. If you are not able to provide security and you're not able to provide good, high level of living, make people feel great again. Like Trump or Putin, make Poland great again. So the communists started to lean on golden age of the noble culture, like Middle Ages, 16th and 17th century, the nobility fighting against occupiers, and the Polish knights fighting against German knights and being successful. And the blockbuster, I put here, the very first Polish cinema blockbuster, Krzyżacy, from 1960, Knights of the Teutonic Order. It was all, my parents were born in 1950, and they remember it was the very first time they went to cinema. They went with their school classes to cinema and watched this movie, and the movie it's huge. It's a blockbuster. It lasts for 3 hours, and 1 hour is a battle. And after the movie, when you see you watch all the Polish knights beating the German knights and being successful and winning the battle, you're Polish. You're becoming Polish, even if you don't want it, because it's good. And this is a story or an experience of the whole generation. Like Ziggy Boniek, Lech Wałęsa, my parents, all of them started to feel Polish somewhere in the 1950s, 60s, and it spread out to the whole society. And it was imposed by the communists. So the communists were actually national communists. They were communists by the name, but actually they were nationalists. And they were not successful in imposing communism in Poland, but they were really successful in developing national feelings and national identity in Poland. And the other blockbusters from 1969 and 1973, they just continued the story, and the generation of my parents, or the generation born somewhere in between before the World War II, during the war, and after the war. In my opinion, I argue it is the first generation which became Polish through and through. And in my generation, I was born in 1976. For us, being Polish is something self-understandable. It's like air. It's like we breathe. We were born Polish. We don't think about it because it's self-understanding. And this is a huge story. I mean, it's maybe 30, 40 years when the process started to be a mass nationalizing process and completing in not later than in the 1970s. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Andrzej. That was really impressive speech. Really appreciated it. I don't know if we have time for if someone has questions about this topic. Like I have one question actually, maybe two. One is that if in 19th century, this is like my curiosity, in 19th century, like this image of the warrior was also supported by the tradition of Poland to have foreign fighters, because Poland, as also many other countries during that time, but Poland has in 19th century a huge tradition of foreign fighters. So Polish, that we can like call them Polish because they were born in this geographic area, mostly not like with any passport at that time. But we have, for example, many Polish in Italy that comes to fight for Italian independence wars. And actually, I was speaking before also with him, like that I found some documents in some archives where the central government said to the administration, local administration, to be aware for Polish that are passing our roads because they can be dangerous. And also, I guess, Polish identity is one of the mostly represented during Risorgimento as foreign fighters, especially in Republican parts. Is one of the most represented. So just this curiosity. And another curiosity is also if with the films, movies, and with this new media, there is also a Poland tradition that tries to be also closer to European, to Europe. For example, I think about the narrative about Polish hussars, that fought against the Ottoman Empire, and they saved Vienna, they saved the Christianity of Europe.
Yeah.
So just have this curiosity.
But all of this is a noble culture.
Yeah.
All of this is a noble narrative. Like the military hussars in the 17th century. They were Polish knights,
yeah.
Polish nobility, and they were landowners. they beat their peasants, they killed the peasants if they wanted, they raped the women, and it was a very violent system and extremely unfair system, but hardly nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
There is a new way of research in Poland. It's been like for 2 or 3 years. So really, a very new way. And it is called People's Turn. It is because it's about peasantry, it's about comparing peasants, serfs, and slaves in the North Atlantic system. This is very much a new way, and it's getting more and more visible, but it's still at the beginning.
Interesting.
I'm a part of the way, as you can probably assume, because it's because of my origins and because of the novel national narrative. It's not a whole story.
Yeah.
It's just a small portion of the story, and I'm angry. I'm angry. We need to end it. We need to show the whole story, and the whole story of power, because it's about power. It's about systematic, asymmetric power, and it's about oppression, but not a very popular topic, not a very popular subject in the Polish history.
Yeah, because also the political use of the Great Poland.
This
really
is
also during
the last.
this was
Yeah, of course, the last 8 years with the Polish populist government, with the right-wing government, extremely anti-communistic government, but extremely nationalistic too. So it's because all the guys, mostly men, who were in the government, they were raised, or they were born and grew up in communist Poland, and I suppose their first cinema visit was Krzyżacy and like the battle against the German Teutonic Knights, and they imagination, their mindset is anti-German, is very much about make Poland great again, lean on the golden age of the Polish history, so late medieval and like 16th, 17th century. But this is an age of oppression of the peasants, and not. I'm angry.
Okay. There are. Yeah.
Just
Okay.
two questions. The first is about the success of novel narratives in the Polish public opinion. What I mean, the novel just a little part of the society, the intelligentsia too, but if I see the history of Poland in the 19th century, is a history full of insurrection, revolution, and so on. And this is some part of this has got at last the support of the urban popular classes, the urban popular groups, not just nobles or intelligentsia. So, for example, in Italy, we have something quite similar. We have a big part of the population that is peasants that are, grosso modo, not part of the Risorgimento movement, but the popular groups in towns and cities are part of this movement. So, what is the situation in Poland? The second question is about the end of the history. Why do you think the okay, there is the problem of the consummation society and so on, but it's quite a paradox that Soviet communist intelligence, communist power developed to legitimate itself a nationalistic narrative. It is typical not only of all, but of all the countries of East Europe. Why? And this is at the height of this, you know, this is they grow up the opposition that in the 80s will be the kind. Why do you think they decided to develop a nationalistic narrative in the decades after the second? Because a part of the narrative will do is the same in the Western countries. Italy has got a urbanization in the 50s and has got a nationalization process in the Italian version in the 50s and 60s, but with a non-nationalist narrative. Why in the communist country we have a nationalist narrative?
Yep. Okay, first to the 19th century. Those uprisings, rebels, insurrections were not really popular. When we look at the uprising of 1794, Kosciuszko was the leader of the insurrection, and he liberated his peasants because he fought in the American War of Independence. He was a progressive one, so he liberated his peasants, but it was not popular. It's all of us as noble people didn't liberate their peasants. So those peasants who fought during the rebellion, they were obliged to fight. They didn't do it willingly. They were forced to fight. 1840, 1830, the rebellion, the insurrection is to 90%. Up to 90% is run by noble people, and the noble warrior husbands and freedom fighters from the noble group, from the social group of nobility. And it was not successful, and this is the very first time when the nobility or the descendants of the nobles, of the landowners, started to think about extension, about spreading out with the idea of Polishness to other groups, because they noticed we won't be successful without involving more people, without involving peasants and city people and so on. And the first try was the beginning of the 1860s to involve more population, but it was another disaster. It didn't work. Because the Russian Tsar liberated the peasants, the liberation came from the Tsar and not from the Polish nobles. They had the opportunity at the beginning of the uprising to liberate their peasants, but they didn't want it. They didn't abolish the serfdom, and the Tsar abolished the serfdom, and he was the hero for the peasants. And it's a very good question about the modern times, about the 1950s, 60s, the paradoxical similarities throughout different systems, and the national or the nation-building processes occurring at the same time, actually, in very different parts of the world. And I think it's about technology. It's about how can you spread your ideas, your message effectively. And it is about telecommunications, it's about cinema, about centralizing schooling systems, governing effectively. It's more effective governing in government in the 1950s, 60s because of the tools, of the mass media tools, than around 1900 or around 1850s or 1860s. And I think this is very much about media, about being involved in mainstream societies. And it is not before 1950s, 60s that a lot of people are involved in mainstream societies. In Brazil, Italy, obviously, in Poland and Soviet Union too. So it's not. I think it's not very much about generations. Like when I was working on migrants, there is a so-called Hansen's law. So the first generation is coming to the foreign place and is not integrating in the new place. The second generation will be more involved and learn to speak the foreign language, and it's becoming local. But the third generation is very much relaxed about being a new, like American or Brazilian. But actually, it is not about this. It's more about, like, for example, those guys in Texas. The first wave or the big waves were in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. In the 1940s, it was the fifth generation or even sixth generation. And they were still speaking Polish, or the Polish dialect, the Polish peasant dialect from the local communities. Because they were not involved in the mainstream society. But with the media, with the exodus to the cities, mixing with other people, marrying people from outside of the community, it started to be a new society of a mainstream society, like American society or Polish society. This is what I observed in these three different continents. I'm very grateful for your talk about the Italian case, because I know only very little about it.
Okay, Marco.
Thank you for relation. When in Italy we think about Poland and history, usually our thinking goes to the influence of Church, Catholic Church, in the history of Poland, and it is a national identity. While you didn't,
I was not talking much about Church.
Yes. And at the same time, when Poland is described as the main problem for the Soviet power in the Eastern Europe after the Second World War, many historians underlined the role of the Church in Polish society, and probably this aspect made very difficult to use national identity to enforce the Soviet power in Poland, as for example the Soviets made in Romania or Yugoslavia, where the national identity was very important in the communist propaganda. Okay? And you told that at the beginning, power people and peasants in particular where beneficiati benefit, yes, by the Soviet reforms of the land and about the school education, yes. But I think that poor people, Polish peasants, for example, like Malaysia, will be opponents of the Soviet power. Probably, I don't know, I think for the influence of the church on the Polish society and on the Polish people, working class people, yes. And I wanted to know, as you think about the role of the church.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, good. Great question. Yeah, I haven't talked much at all about the church.
Okay, just another little question to this main question. Which was the role of the church in the 18th century during the Polish Risorgimento? Yes, if you give us some elements about these topics.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Great question, because the church, Catholic Church, and when this is very Polish. When we say the church, it is automatically Catholic Church. Yeah, it's the same. So, or when we say
probably today church is Catholic Church, but we see that in the 19th century.
When we say Pope, it's automatically Giovanni Paolo II. So you don't need to say Pope somebody, but it's always it's like Pope did it in the 1970s. Okay. So the Catholic Church was a part of the system in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. They benefited. They also had peasants. They also were a part of serfdom system. So they owned peasants. They owned serfs. And I'm quite sure the system would not have worked without the church, because the church or the priests preached every Sunday to the poor people. You need to agree to the system because this is given by the Lord, but this is given by the God. And on the other side, the poor people were listening to this and thinking, okay, this is a God-given system, so we can't do anything against it. It was easier to live in this kind of unfairness because it was given by God, and it was easier to accept it. And the church benefited from it. Poor people were ensured, okay, this is the right order of living and dying, and in the next life you will get the award. And it was disciplining too. No? It was the people were disciplined by the church, by the priests. And when the communists started to took over the power, at the very beginning there was an alliance between the communists and the Catholic Church, because we don't have the presentation now anymore. But when the Polish country was shifted to the west, and all not Catholics or non-Catholics were outside of the Polish country, or were murdered or deported, and the Catholic, or the state and the nation became homogenized, Polish-speaking and Catholic, and even the western parts, the new parts of Poland, were dedicated now to Poland and used to be Protestant, German Protestant regions, and now they were Catholic. So the Polish Catholic Church was excited about it, a new great opportunity to send the God message to the places where not Catholics or anti-Catholic people lived there before. And those regions, the former Eastern German regions, were populated now by Polish Catholics. And at the very beginning, the first 3 or 4 years, both the church and the communists worked together to adapt the new regions into Polish state. And then, this is the part of your question when you asked about why church and workers and poor people started to align together and in national or started to build up a national alignment. They were so the church, of course, was oppressed by the communists in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So the Catholic Church didn't have any interest in supporting communists. And on the other hand, the workers, or the former peasants and workers, now workers like Lech Wałęsa, they were extremely disappointed in the communist system. I think it's a little bit about expectations too. A lot of people expected to be seen or to be respected, to have the opportunity to advance more, but not very much about the mental. I mean, it is not very much about the mental part of everyday life. It's more about working conditions. It's more about being well paid or fairly paid. And they felt they are not fairly paid. They felt their working conditions are not good. And when people were not allowed to move from Poland to the foreign countries like Western Germany or United States or France or Italy, but they did know in those countries it's better. The people, even the poor people, the working people are better off than in Poland, Romania or Bulgaria. And they have more freedom. This is the main story, more freedom, more consumption, more possibilities for goods, for purchasing and buying goods and services, earning money, having freedom, going on holidays, buying a new car. All of this was lacking in Poland. And at the beginning, like I would say till the end of the 1950s or beginning of the 1960s, there was still very much hope. It will work out. It will be better in countries like Poland, Bulgaria, or Romania. But it turned out the Western democracies are a better place for living. Better place for working and money and spending money.
Did they have this news from their parents who lived in the West in the Western system too?
Okay, this is a little bit complex. Only a few people were allowed to travel. For example, my parents didn't have a passport. Because they were not allowed to travel abroad. So if they travel only in Poland. But For example, my uncle, I told you the story about the siblings of my parents. One of my uncles was sent to the industrial area to Upper Silesia. And Upper Silesia to the miner school. So he became a miner close to Gliwice, which is an industrial mining, coal mining place. And he married a local woman, the Upper Silesia local, and her sister lived in Germany. And they were allowed to travel a bit. And because Upper Silesia used to be a part of Germany before the war, and almost all the people over there were allowed to apply for German citizenship. They were allowed to go to Germany. Not everybody, but many of them. And I remember in the middle of the 1980s, we had a huge people married together, and a couple wedding.
Okay.
It was a huge wedding in Warsaw in the middle of the 1980s. My family is here. And my uncle from Upper Silesia came with her wife in a Volkswagen Golf. And we were so impressed. It was Western, and we were really impressed. I remember I wanted to sit in this car for a while. And so I've never been to the West, I've never been to Germany, I've never been to the United States, but somehow, as a 10 years old, I did know Western is better. Western is something better, and it's richer, and people live there. People are better off in West Germany or in the United States. And I don't know how, because somehow, okay, it was a kind of block. The information was blocked, and we were not allowed to travel. But we did know in other places it's more consumption, better goods, and some people turn up with better shoes or better clothes, and my uncle with Volkswagen Golf and so on. And somehow we did know, okay, it's something we are not able to reach in Warsaw, despite Warsaw being a capital city. So it was the best place to live in Poland, but still behind our expectations. And when the church was extremely disappointed by the communist rule because of the communists they annexed a lot of property, church property, in the late 1940s and 1950s. So the church was really oppressed by the communists, and then poor working people still were poor working people in the communist too, and we saw a small portion of the population, the elite communist population, is doing really good. We don't want that kind of system. We want, and the protests, the Solidarność protests, were supported by millions because of freedom, because of consumption.
They were supported by the church.
And they were supported by the church too. So it was the very first time the church and the poor working people aligned together.
Because during the 70s that there was the famous Czarny Czwartek in Poland, so the Black Thursday, there wasn't the church supporting the protesting by the harbor workers. And, this is interesting that in 70s there was still a little of
this. They didn't protest for the same.
No, you're right. You're right. They didn't protest for the same reason. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for being here today. For choosing Pisa as a place where to speak. Actually, this lesson is meeting with what I am studying like since 2 years to till today. Because and I have a few questions. One is more important than the others, so if we can manage the time about this, because I am writing a thesis, historian student, about General Vlad Savanders, and so every part of this discussion is about building the national identity of Poland. And I was thinking on a few things. First, I understood that the first nationalization of the population, majority of the population, happened during the first period of the Soviet era. So the mass media made possible to share all these new blockbusters that every Polish person could see, and so that's quite useful information. And I had only two big questions. The first one is about Józef Piłsudski as the leader of the Second Republic, but at the same time an enemy of the Soviet Union because they fought the Soviet-Polish War. And so how this character is in the process of the narrative of national building of modern war. And the second question is about Vlad Savanders. So the man who faced Soviets and the Nazis, who went to Gulag and then fought for the Allies in the West part. And this is part of probably the biggest narrative, as Dombrowski fought in Italy against the Germans. That's at the time where the Austrians, but it's kind of mythological.
Freedom fighter.
Yeah, exactly. And so how big is part of the modern narrative? Because it's quite important in all this stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, great. I'm very glad you're doing research on Polish history.
Yeah, Polish law, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not only on Polish history, I suppose. It's more about how national narratives emerge and so on. So it's broader. And Piłsudski and Anders, they were basically absent in the national narrative between 45 and 1989. When I went to school in the 1980s, I didn't know those guys existed. We were taught about all the uprisings and so and stuff, but we didn't know there was Władysław Anders or Józef Piłsudski, of course, the father of the independence, but somehow it was just what was mentioned once and nobody talked about it more. The same story with the Jewish people, for example. We were taught Poles were the biggest victims of the Second World War, but nobody told us actually 90% of those Poles were Jewish. So we were just taught Polish citizens, more than 3 million Polish citizens were killed by the Nazis, not Soviets. They were killed by the Nazis. And we were not told most of them were Jewish. So, the national narrative during the communist time was very selective. And it's been the same case in the Kaczynski era. He's very selective too. The former government, before Kaczynski government, the Tusk government, the liberal government, was focused on economy. And history was like, you can do what they want. Because it doesn't make money, it doesn't cost money, do what you want. And Kaczynski is obsessed with historical narrative, and from his perspective, it is the most important part, more important than economy. This is similar story to the communists like Putin. He is not able to secure jobs. He is not able to secure good living conditions for the Russian people in Russia. So they make them great again, or they make Russia great again. So they make not the living conditions, but the pride of the people becoming great because of invading other countries like Georgia, Ukraine, and Chechnya, and so on, or getting Crimea again, back again. So we didn't learn nothing about Anders and Piłsudski during the communist era. And nowadays, of course, it's different.
There is also the myth of the Polish legion, no? The legion that fought in First World War. Yeah, Italy was also the one that fought in the First World War. That was the Polish legion. And there is also a recent film, movie, Polish movie, The Legion. I will continue with my schooling experiences because I went to the very average Polish school, and Poland was very centralized. The schooling system it's being still very centralized. It means when you go to school in Warsaw and you go to school in a small village somewhere in the middle of nowhere, we basically learn the same. And in the 1990s, we started to learn about Piłsudski, but we started to learn about the first Polish Legion in 1914 and 15. They were extremely successful. They fought against the occupiers and so on and so on. But when I look at it now, I know they were not successful. Yeah.
They were hardly anybody noticed them. They were small and didn't matter. They didn't matter at all. But so the narratives, the national narratives, the historical narratives in Poland are very important, and they are not based on historical research. They are based on political needs. And it's been, as I said, before Kaczynski, it was a little bit easier for us, for historians doing research, because they didn't matter. But then Kaczynski meant, okay, this is not good for Polish country and for Polish society, not being informed well about Polish history. And Polish history for him and for the guys around him is making Poland great again.
So in this perspective, Anders is one of the characters that you have to choose because he's the one who never surrendered the enemy. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So there are no more questions, I guess, so we can close. And thank you again, Andrzej, for this.
Thank you.
And thank you
for coming.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, I studied in this Polish movie.